All right, folks, we have an interesting video. It is with Damian Riffle, and Chad and Damian had this conversation a while back, and it's all about the new moon. And there is a new moon coming October 6th, and you're going to want to watch, take what he says, put it into consideration for what you have going on. And then there's another one in early November. So we hope you guys enjoy it. Do you believe in the moon? Leave a comment below, and here we go.
So when that time comes, you have a deer patterned, you have whatever your target buck. Does the weather and everything else go out the window for you? And it's moon phase, whether it's the weather's good or not.
So yes and no. So I'll give you a for instance where I kind of shot myself in the foot. In 2018, I shot my biggest buck to date, which is just shy of 180 inches, and the new moon phase was coming in, and I think it was the second. So my window that I believe in is I take the new moon, I go 3 days prior and 3 days after, and in that window, I will not miss an evening hunt. I don't hunt in October. I don't hunt mornings. I believe it's too risky to go in and bump them off their natural feeding patterns. So I rely strictly on evenings. And when I come out of the woods, I don't let them see me leave the woods. I have it's an alpha dog, Primo's alpha dog, and I set off a coyote call. As I'm walking to the stand, I hang it in a tree 100, 200 feet from my stand. And if there's deer anywhere around, or I feel there might be deer around, I set that thing off and clear any deer close to me. And then as I'm easing out, I got to walk right by it, and I pick it up. And as I'm walking to my truck, if I have a long walk to the truck, I'll continue to set it off as I'm walking, because that keeps bumping the deer further away from you and not seeing a human. They think it's a coyote coming. And I've had great success with that, early season and late season. When the snow's on, you're hunting food sources, same exact thing. So that being said, that buck to jump back on the weather, I believe it was the second or third day of the new moon phase that I watched for. It was 92 degrees. If you remember, in 2018, we got like a 90-degree snap right in the middle of the month. And I'm like, I know it's the moon phase. It's 92 degrees. What are the odds? And sure as enough, that evening with a cell cam, my phone goes off, and he's standing at a feeder of all things in broad daylight. Well, it was last light. It was the last 5 minutes of shooting light. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. It was the moon phase. I talked myself out of not hunting because of the heat, and there he was. And I'm kind of down on myself, and I'm like, oh, I screwed that up. So the next night, it was 95 degrees. And I was like, there's no way he's going to do that 2 days in a row. And that night, a cell cam went off, and I had him on an oak flat moving in broad daylight. So weather, I don't think, has a whole lot to do with it. That moon phase is a go-to for me. Now, I do think if you add to that new moon phase a cold front, it exponentially increases your odds. The day I ended up killing him was the 5th day of that new moon phase, and the cold front came through. It rained all day, and it was supposed to stop at 4. Well, I couldn't get in there before 4, so I went in right at 4, and it quit as I pulled in the farm, which I said that on the Whitetail Cribs episode, talking about him. And deer instantly started moving, and I'm, bumping a couple does, walking to my stand, and I get up in my stand. I wasn't in my stand an hour, and lo and behold, he comes walking out, in a field checking a scrape line at 5 o'clock in the evening, and I ended up shooting him at 5:30 in the evening, in that moon phase with a cold front right after the rain. And the cold front and the rain is a go-to for me. I'll sit in the rain any chance I get, because that moment that rain stops, the deer are on their feet.
Right.
They get up, they shake off, and they just start browsing around. And if you know where he's at and you can get somewhere close to where you feel he is, there's a good chance you'll kill him. My 165 I shot, same exact scenario. I shot him September 30th in the new moon. It was the first day of the October new moon phase, but it fell in September that year. And I shot him at 7 o'clock. It poured down rain. I mean, torrential downpour, and it stopped. And less than 5 minutes later, he stepped out onto the field, and I shot him. So,
Right. Well, there's a couple things I want to circle back to. One, for anyone who's unfamiliar with the lunar phases or lunar cycle, a new moon is, I guess, considered what I call it a dark moon. So it's not illuminated. Like a full moon is typically illuminated as long as there's no cloud cover. Though a new moon is the exact opposite.
correct.
The opposite of that. So if anybody's wondering if, that's essentially what it is, and if you wanted a visual, you could Google that.
It's called the new moon because it's the new the
From
new
that-
moon starts the new lunar cycle.
Correct.
It starts waxing, getting bigger at that point, and then once the full moon hits, then it's waning, getting smaller.
Right.
So yeah, it's the new. It's called new because it's the dark moon starting of the new lunar cycle.
Right. So when you're on a target deer and you know that phase is coming up, like I think the October new moon is the 16th or 17th, 18th, something like that. Are you hunting food sources in those evening sits, or are you like describe that tactic there? Because it sounds like you're on field edges, food sources.
Yes and no. So a lot of the property that I hunt is reclaimed strip mine, so you have a lot of field edge.
Mm-hmm.
And the farms that I hunt don't have a lot of cover. So I try not to get into the cover, because you start going into the cover, you're going to start bumping deer. They don't have a lot of options at bed. You start bumping them, they're not going to be bedding there, that sort of thing. So October, I rely on food sources, depending on if it's a food plot, acorns, apple trees, whatever the case may be. I do run feeders. I don't hunt directly over feeders very often, because I just think it's very low percentage on killing big mature deer. In Ohio, everybody and their brother feeds, and any mature deer realizes a big pile of corn is not natural. But occasionally one will be dumb and come in, and I'm not going to pass up the opportunity if I feel like I can outsmart him. What was the question?
Well, it was just whether or not you're hunting on food sources, like a stand location.
It's transition from where I feel they're bedding to food source, all the way to the food source.
Okay.
If I got photos of him coming into a food source and he feels comfortable coming into that food source, food plot, whatever it may be, in daylight, I will hunt the food source.
Right.
But I will try to get as close to his bedding wherever I feel he's bedding, and try to catch him coming, and using trail cameras to figure out his travel routes by that.
Yeah, 100%. One of the things, like we've been talking to a ton of different people on the moon and what their thoughts are, and the thing for me is where I get hung up is everyone has like their own strategy.
100%.
Like, Justin Hollinsworth, a guy just south of here. It's weird that his is almost the opposite of his belief is almost the opposite of what yours is. So he's hunting, I think it's plus or minus 3 days after a full moon. Mm-hmm. So you're at the new moon, he's at the full moon. He's I think 4 days before and 4 days after. So there's whatever, but he's ignoring the day before the full moon and a day after the full moon. So there's 3 days there. It's no go for him. So as we start to talk to all these people, there's transit times, overhead underfoot stuff. Sure. There's cloud cover. There's moon phase. An interesting thing that I'm guess is going through my mind, wondering if any of this other stuff around the moon lines up with the new moon. So have you ever paid attention to the transit times, overhead 100%. Underfoot stuff? So
actually, I printed those out so I can talk to a little more in depth on them.
Yeah.
And so if anybody's interested in going to the moon, looking in the moon phase, the Farmer's Almanac website is by far the best that I've found, because you can go in there. They have the moon calendar, and if you scroll down to the bottom of the moon calendar, you can pick your dates for whatever moon you want or whatever month, and then you scroll down to the bottom of the page, and they have rising and setting times for the moon. Mm-hmm. And that's all the information you need. And they also have when it's overhead. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, this year, the 16th is the new moon. It's rising at 7:11 a.m., setting at 7:04 p.m. Straight overhead at 1 o'clock.
Yeah.
Not ideal for hunting.
Right.
if you can get that moon and find out where it's overhead or underfoot in that moon phase, I do agree with that. If you're hunting and it's already and it's overhead and it's past straight overhead, more towards the setting side, it's not ideal. And typically with the new moon, it's rising in the morning, setting in the evening. So you really want to pay attention to when it's underfoot. So if I kind of draw out a clock or look at a clock, it's just easier for me to draw it out and look at things. So on the 16th, it's rising at 7 a.m., setting at 7 p.m. So you're right in that range right here. So your straight overhead is 1 o'clock. So your underfoot is the exact opposite of that. So
the way I always do that, I take, and I don't use the Farmer's Almanac, but I use Weather Underground. Does a similar thing, gives you the rise and set. You take that time, and I just basically find the half, and it's not exact, but it gives you a rough idea.
It gives you real close.
Yeah.
Right. But yeah, and if you can, again, back to the weather, if you can add up the new moon overhead or rising with a cold front, it's, I go in the woods those days, and I feel like I'm going to be dragging something out of the woods that evening.
Yeah.
You're pretty confident. The year I killed my big one, the day that happened, I think it was the first. It was right before the heat wave hit that year. I think it was the first day. It had rained part of the day. The moon was going to be underfoot the last hour of daylight, and it was just like perfect. It was cool,
yeah.
Everything. And I walked in there, and that buck was bedding on the neighboring farm. And as I drive up the lane, I look over, and I can see he had brush hogged that field he was walking across every evening to come over to my property that day. And I almost just went home. I was like, you got to be kidding me, because you knew he blew him out of there, brush hogging. But but it worked out in the long run. So